Welcome to the Smarter Leadership Podcast, where we explore the power of leadership, from overcoming challenges to shaping cultures and building a lasting legacy. Through inspiring stories and insights from our guests, we'll share transformative lessons to help you thrive in today's interconnected world. I'm Tucci Ivowi. Join us for conversations that will inspire thought and action. Akua Owusu-Nartey is the Chief Client Officer and Head of Connected Culture for Ogilvy Africa. With over 19 years' experience, Akua is a marketing powerhouse known for creating impactful campaigns and building recognizable brands. An advocate for business transformation and social change, Akua has worked with key global clients such as Nestlé, Coca-Cola, Tullow, Melinda Gates Foundation, Guinness, and UNICEF. She's also the host of Stir It Up, a podcast focused on having authentic conversations on uncomfortable subjects we often avoid. Akua, how would you describe yourself in 3 words? And how would you say those qualities reflect your leadership style and your work, your general outlook in life?
You're digging right into it, aren't you? Resilient, empathetic, happy.
Let's start with happy. What does it mean to you to be happy, and how do you manifest that throughout your life and work?
So happy as in I've learned contentment and joy in myself. There are times when I lose sight of all the good things that are in my life, but I always remember to come back to that base. And so things don't keep me down for too long. I always say that I could be upset about something being in the wrong place in the kitchen downstairs, and by the time I get upstairs, it's out of my mind, right? So I'm generally quite bubbly and happy and, comfortable in myself. And that means that regardless of what's going on in my external environment, I've learned to be content.
So do people see that? Do they sense that when they're working with you, particularly, your teams, your colleagues?
Oh, yes. The teams, yes. Because everything's a joke. I mean, so I'm very direct, right? So I would say things as they are. But I would move on very quickly. And they know that everything's on face value. You can take everything on face value. So yes, they would sense that. I think that the people who don't always sense that are my children and those closest to me. But yes, I am.
It's always the closest to us that,
always those closest to us.
More. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So on resilience.
I've been through some stuff. And having been through so much, just even from being a child, and being able to always, get back on my feet, and just having the mindset that I can navigate anything is something that I always,
I'd like to dig into some of those stories, maybe starting as early back as you can remember. What are some of the experiences or some of the knocks that you've had that have brought you to this place where, you can confidently say that, you're resilient because of what you've been through?
So the first thing is probably how I was raised. I've often described myself as having raised myself in many ways, because I lived with my dad, and he was a surgeon. He was very busy all the time. And it was kind of a strict household, but also a lot of freedom. And I know it might be interesting you might wonder how those two things live. Exactly, those two things live together. So his strictness was who broke the glass. And depending on who broke it, you either got a spanking or you got a real big yelling at. But at the same time, he was away a lot. And so you had copious amounts of time to do whatever you please. So being able to learn to self-regulate, self-govern, pretty much manage my own time was something that I had to learn pretty much on my own. And I say resilience because there were times when one would feel that you didn't have the right support systems that other kids had. but every day I'd pick up my son.
Was that because you went with your mother?
That was probably, so I had a stepmom in the house at a point in time, but she also went away, right? So pretty much it was dad and us, the siblings, right? And the siblings, everybody, my siblings are much older than I am. And so, you just had to kind of work through it yourself. So that's one thing that I would always say, that being able to kind of work through it, self-govern and manage my own affairs was something that was a big one for me.
Having lived some of these experiences at a young age, helping you to get to that, point, but there would have been other stages in your life, before getting to, let's say, where you are today. So maybe as an adult, or maybe, as you were starting out in your career, or as you were building other things in your life, whether family, passions, what other things have you had to face that have kind of maybe knocked you a step or two, but at the same time built you up?
So the first thing I would think about that's kind of knocked me a step or two would be taking on a job that I felt I couldn't do. Well, I felt I could do at the beginning, and I realized it was much harder than I thought it was. And then being able to kind of learn have the humility to just start from the basics, right? So I decided I wanted to be a strategic planner at a point in time. Okay. And when I started off, it was really hard because, strategy is about problem solving. And I think I'm a solution architect all the time because I immediately go to finding solutions to things. But as I started to navigate my role as a planner, I realized that there were so many things I didn't know because I had not originally started off in that field. I started off with managing clients. Right. And so just being in different environments where we had clients that were a bit more demanding than others, I realized that I needed to go back to basics. So that would be one thing where it's just even having the humility to understand that there are things you don't know. And you do need to kind of go back and figure it out. And I'd never been in that position before. I was always the person who always had it figured out and I'll get it right, first time right. And it was with clients like, at the time, it was with clients like Unilever, clients like Nestle, clients Diageo, where they all had very distinct ways of planning and doing, and even Vodafone, right? Strategic thinking. And you'd realize that I don't understand how this works, right? So that would be one area where I felt like I just needed to recalibrate very quickly. A personal example as I grew up was, obviously, you get married and you think you're going to be married for life. And then you realize, it's not working the way I want it to work, right? And then just coming to that decision and saying, listen, I have to walk away from this because it's not serving me. And actually, it's not serving the interest of my kids the way I would want it to serve the interest of my kids. And the first part of it is spending lots of time thinking, I failed. I didn't succeed, because for us as women, a lot of the time, that's a big part of what defines us, right? And then I realized that, no, in actual fact, it's okay. And knowing that I don't carry shame for that, and knowing that I am whole, I'm a whole person regardless of that, chapter in my life, and just being able to build a good relationship with my kids and co-parent as best as we can, through that. And that was definitely a big knocker for me, because you know what? I think you know
something that you will never
something that
never expect. You could never,
and I didn't wish for myself, if you know what I mean. But just being able to kind of go through it and be successful in so many other parts of my life, and also count my blessings, in so many other parts of my life. So there'll be two things.
Wonderful. I'm gonna, go back to the first one, which was about, some of the time earlier in your career dealing with some of the big clients you mentioned, and it takes me back some good memories and some tough memories as well.
Absolutely. Yes.
When I was then communication director with Nestle, and we had what I consider one of the better agency client relationships, so despite you probably thinking at times how difficult it was, because I've been on both sides. I started off on the agency world, and actually Nestle was my client. This is something we have in common. And I remember back in the early days, I used to go for meetings every week, and I used to dread
going
for those meetings. It was like, we could
that.
never do anything right, you know. But after some time, we built some of the best relationships to the point where I ended up, you know, they asked me to join them, and so I really can appreciate how things feel and seem and are from both sides. And you know, you came in, and actually pretty early on, we were very happy with what you had to offer. So there's a sense, and I've talked about this before, where I shared my own experiences about what has been often termed imposter syndrome. But there are times when we feel that, are we really up to scratch? And we kind of give ourselves a hard time. But on the other side, someone is seeing you as more than capable and as actually someone who delivers value. So I want to spend a few moments on that, because overall the experiences I had as kind of your main interface, you know, on the client side, was one which, despite disagreements, because that's the nature of the game.
And we did have quite a few tough, clients that we needed to service, because you were servicing quite a few clients internally, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. You know, so we'd often have our, you know, you're direct, I'm direct, but you actually really brought a lot of value to the table. So why, what makes you feel that you were not as good as maybe we would or others would have perceived you to be? Do you think you're tough on yourself? And have you always been that way? Is it because your standards are high, or?
Yeah. So I'd never thought about it as being tough on myself. But when my dad died in 2020, one of his closest friends, Kwame Pianim, was reading a tribute for him from his mates in Achimota School. And he talked about how tough he was as a person. And somewhere in that story, he says, but the person that Kujo was toughest on was on himself. And it was a penny drop moment for me when he said that, because I realized that I'm actually tougher on myself than anybody else. And so there are a lot of times where I overthink things, and I plan and I plan and I plan. And so that would definitely be one of the things that comes through when I look at how I've worked, you know, with different clients. And I find that most people stop working when they're tired. I stop when it's done. And that means that I'm always super stretched. And I'm only now learning not to impose that on my teams, because what it means is I haven't stopped, so you are not stopping, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm learning that not everybody's at the same pace that I am at, right? So I think the first thing is I'm tough on myself. A part of me needs things to be perfect. A part of me didn't have as much exposure when I was starting out, even though I was super smart and I was, you know, willing to do the work and all of that. So I would second guess myself a lot. Not as much today. There are parts in my life that I still second guess myself, but not in as many aspects of my life. So those would be the two big things. Another thought I have for you that I think impacted, you know, the imposter syndrome that there was culturally, you don't have that many Ghanaians taking on those kinds of roles that I was taking in 2013, right? My South African counterparts will be 30 and be MDs of something. And that would be the same thing in the UK or in the US or anywhere in Europe. But here you needed to be 45, old and dusty. Yes, and yes, I'm saying that I'm 45, old and dusty. Well, I don't look that old and dusty.
Not at all.
Right? But you needed to be much older, have a lot of experience, having built a house, having done so much, right? Before you would be given a business to manage. And that wasn't the case. So culturally, I felt like I was a bit of an anomaly. And so that probably was also a bit of a limiting factor, played a role in how I was thinking and seeing myself and what I was able to bring to the table. Yeah.
I want to take up this thing about, you know, being tough on oneself, because I can definitely relate there. I always tell people I don't expect anyone to do what I'm not ready to do. And I'm toughest on myself. And, you know, one does tend to get disappointed when others are not putting in the same level of effort. And I think, like you, I've also tried to, let people go at a bit of a slower pace while it's difficult. But, you grow and you realize that, yes, people can grow at different paces. And sometimes people give themselves a hard time. And I think today people are suffering a lot from, the different types of mental ailments, or just generally not feeling, good about themselves. And I think when they see achievers or overachievers, it kind of, plays more into that, sentiment. So are there some words that you can share with people who might be kind of giving themselves a hard time right now, maybe undeservedly so? Some advice you can give them to kind of help them on their journey?
So last week I gave a talk at this mental health and EAP summit. So it's an employee assistance program summit. And I was talking about self-worth because the theme was around mental capital. And the question I'd asked myself was, in the last couple of years, what are the things that I've learned? And one of the biggest themes was just around self-worth. A lot of the time, we're looking externally for validation to validate that we're good enough. But we need to know that we are good enough. We've earned the right to be here. We were born. So the initial thought I have is people need to start thinking, or youngsters need to start seeing their self-worth, but not in a boastful, arrogant, prideful fashion, but more in the sense that I can do it. When they look in the mirror, they need to see themselves as people who bring something to the table. And there's a need to kind of work through what you tolerate and what you accept and have certain kinds of boundaries. There's a need for you to be accountable and say that, okay, yes, I'm good enough, but at the same time, this is my responsibility. So those are some of the thoughts that come out at me where I think that, yes, we are in a time where, and resilience as well, we are in a time where, we don't have the mental rigor that some of us, because some of the things that I went through as a child, my children couldn't go through it.
Yeah.
2 days ago, I sent them a post from Instagram that says that children who do chores are very successful as they grow up.
Yes, I saw that one.
You see?
Yes. we must like looking at the same things.
Yes.
It's appearing in the algorithm. I saw that one.
So I saw something that said that. So I just sent it. I sent it to my two daughters, and actually sent it to your dad as well. So the three of them. And a friend of mine. So 4 people I sent it to. And I put a note at the bottom of it, and I said, chores galore. You're still going to do the chores because I know you're going to be successful in the future. And then I said, and I love you lots. Mm-hmm. And then one of my daughters completely ignored me. And the older one who, does chores, but sometimes it's not always easy to get her to do all the chores. She goes like, I love you, Ma. Right. And I was thinking, don't try and butter me up. Right. But I think that there's so much that we went through as, youngsters, and kids today would struggle to navigate a lot of those things. But we need to bring some of those things back to the table, because that's what builds their confidence, that's what builds problem-solving abilities, that's what allows children to understand that, to even self-govern, just being able to know when to get up, get ready for school, study, time to study, time for play, and all of those things. So,
yeah. So you mentioned self-worth, but you said, that there was a but at the same time, take responsibility. So it's not just about, let's say self-worth is a very positive thing, but if it just becomes about you and you're not ready to bring anything to the table, there's an issue there. So taking responsibility, and it took me back to a news item I heard over the last week or so. It was talking about the fact that 60% of employers are employers are sacking about 60% of their Gen Z employees because of a bad work attitude. And I wanted to get your experiences. I mean, you work in the creative industry. The creative industry is filled with young people. What have been your experiences? And, what really is their attitude to work today? I know it's a general kind of question, and there are always going to be exceptions and stars.
I need to be very careful what I say. Because the internet could come for me.
Be the case?
So, when we were growing up, the thinking was you go to school, you learn hard, you pass your exams, and you find a job. You get married, you work for however many years, you have kids, and then maybe you build a house when you're 50, and then all this while you go for holidays once every 4 or 5 years. Maybe you never even go for a holiday. And it's a very, very rigid kind of life. Today, my view is that we have a generation of kids who think that they need to have a richer experience in life, and there needs to be some kind of balance between work and the life that they live. There's a need to be some kind of integration. The only challenge I have experienced is that there needs to be some kind of guardrails or some understanding that in order to have the holidays and be able to chill and have fun, you need to be able to fund it. And so the understanding of what is required to kind of have the life that they seek out is not always clear, I find. The second thought I have is there is a lot of fluidity in the way youngsters operate. And I guess it's the time, right? We didn't have the kind of pressure they have today. Even social media is a mental health killer in itself.
It's a crisis.
It's a crisis, right? The comparison, the constant comparison. And so just even learning to navigate that for themselves. And unfortunately, they don't all have parents who help them navigate those things. So sometimes they simply don't know how. And they also don't want to be told what to do. So in the workplace, it is a struggle because they also want to work for a company that has some kind of purpose or some kind of soft agenda or some kind of meaning or purpose. And a company, sometimes when you have to get your bottom line up and you need to make profits, it's not always easy to kind of balance between the business side of things and the bottom line and, making sure that you're building the right culture. So there's a plethora of things that youngsters are struggling with today. I find that the workplace has a big role to play in terms of what kind of culture you're creating. What kind of environment are you creating for them? But even more importantly, how are you inspiring them? Because with the teams I have worked with, I always say that the teams will go to battle for me. Okay. And the only assumption I can make is because they know I will go to battle for them. And so there's an element of how do you work together? Do you inspire them? Do you teach them? Do you create an enabling environment for them? And do they feel like that is a place where they want to spend time and grow? And that's the one thing that a lot of us leaders need to start thinking about. And it's not always easy because it doesn't come naturally to everybody. But if you want to be able to work with this generation of youngsters, there's a need to meet their personal needs. A salary is not good enough because they will be hungry and be jobless and they'll go and sit at home. I've seen it happen several times. And I'm thinking, hey, I'll never jump out of a job if I don't have another job. But they will do it in a heartbeat. So once you understand that you have a role to play more than just giving instructions, it makes a world of difference in terms of the kind of culture you create and the kind of workforce that you're able to galvanize in service of building a business.
But it's difficult.
It is.
I mean,
it is very difficult.
You mentioned inspiration. If the young people are inspired, they'll come and they'll show up and they'll do their best work. But if they're not, they can, just as easily switch off. But what about their role in inspiring themselves about the kind of future they might want to lead? But you use the word soft, and a word that came to mind is soft life. These days, you're hearing young people who haven't lived.
I want to be a soft life princess.
Who haven't worked. They say they want a soft life. They see parents or business people traveling in business class, and they don't want to sit in economy. They haven't earned a penny their entire lives, and same here. I mean, it's wrong, and that kind of pressure they put on themselves, but without understanding that they also need to put in work to be able to live the types of lifestyles they're aspiring to, is really, for me, that's another crisis. The same way, the social media crisis has come, but I think one is spinning off from the other because of what they're seeing on social media. They're having this vision, but without understanding the reality of, what they need to do and the part they need to play. How do you think, as leaders in general, I mean, you've played your part, at least in your company, you try to understand them, walk with them. You talked about empathy. I was going to come back to that because you mentioned 3 points, and we talked about the resilience and the happiness, but the empathy was the other one. So, we can maybe talk about it here. You really try to, see things the way they see them, and that's probably why it's playing a role and you're able to maybe effectively mobilize them. But how, as leaders in general in society, what can we do about this issue of the youth and about this lazy attitude to work, this entitlement mentality? Or is it just every single leader just trying to do what they can in their pocket of
I think that, and Islam I'm winging it here, there are a few structural things that need to change. So just even how we educate people, our youngsters needs to change, right? We don't educate youngsters to problem solve. They are educated to take instructions, and so it's rote learning. It's almost like they're educated based on memory. Whoever remembers the most passes the exams, right? But there's not an understanding that everything that I learn is that as a tool to help me achieve a certain goal. So the first thing for me would be just even teaching them to problem solve. Like if you see a glass somewhere and it's not meant to be there, you pick it up. That's fundamental. The second thing is how we are raising young people today. I mean, I always say that I got raised, a bit of it was juju and tricks, but at the same time, there was some structure, right? So, or maybe not even structure, there were boundaries. I knew where I'll get in trouble. Okay. And I was not pushing it, right? There's not that much, there are not that many boundaries today. So even putting that in place for kids, and then consequences. A kid has an allowance of X amount, and they don't even have to earn it. They do need to earn it. Either you are babysitting, or you are washing my dishes for me, or you are cleaning something for me, as a way of them understanding that there's no free pass.
But why do you think the boundaries are, let's say, reducing over time?
Busy.
That's okay.
As parents, we are busy. And so we are overcompensating in areas that cause more harm than good, in my opinion.
So for those who say women shouldn't work, would this be a good argument for them?
No. No, think about it. There are a lot of women who are not working who are guilty of the same thing. Right? They're at home, but they want to go and have tea, or they want to, go out and go shopping or chill, or they're very stressed out by their partner, so they're actually in their heads and not necessarily, spending the requisite amount of time. And yes, there are women who are showing up, and there are also working women who are showing up and doing what they need to do, So
Yeah, and I mean, in all seriousness, some of the best people I've worked with are women, mothers who have been experiencing some of the worst things anyone can experience.
Absolutely.
Suffering children, dying children, and they still show up and bring they put everything in and bring the best results. So, I was saying it tongue in cheek, but these are things we really do need to think about, because we keep saying the youth is the future, but actually they are now, aren't they?
They actually now.
They are now.
They are now. They are now.
So, you shared earlier, and I know this from having interacted with you in different ways over the years, that you are a bold speaker, a blunt speaker. You speak your mind. And
gets me in trouble.
It's taken me to, a show that you started, is it about a year ago, called Stir It Up? Yeah, I'd like to hear a bit about it.
So,
what got you into that, and how are the conversations you're having playing a role in, your thought pattern, the way that you already think and the way you behave?
Thank you for asking me that, because I don't think about it often, so it's a good question for me. So Stir It Up was born for a few reasons. I have a whole bunch of friends, and we sit down. I have what I call TED evenings, and we sit down. It's maybe 6 people. We have dinner, and then we have a chat. And
I'm still waiting for that invitation, by the way.
I will.
You're going to get yourself in trouble.
I am definitely getting myself in trouble. And I recycle people, but we have conversations on anything. And I found that those conversations were very rich. And each conversation was a huge learning experience for me. And I remember years ago, a very good friend of mine saying, I'm sure people would want to be a fly on the wall listening to our conversations. And this was years ago. So then the seed was planted. But very much like how you used to be, where you didn't used to post anything and you were extremely private, right? I was not interested in sharing my thoughts, because those were my safe spaces. Those were places where I wanted to be private, and and I'm hugely protective of people who I'm close to. So there are people who are very close to me that you would never know I even knew, because it's important. I find that people can't destroy what they don't know, right? So I keep that circle really tight. But then I found that within a lot of relationships, within a lot of friendships, within a lot of, work relationships, personal relationships, and so on, we began to lack authenticity. We began to lack depth of thought. And we talk about things in a very, very shallow fashion and very surface level. So I thought, how about I start something where we have uncomfortable conversations, conversations that nobody wants to have, conversations that make people think, like take a double turn and say, So I did this brainstorm in my office one day, and I remember the exact people, and there were 3 guys in my office, and I was like, what should I call this show? What should I call this show? And we kept on, going round and round, and I was like, Stir It Up. And that's how Stir It Up was born. It's grown very quickly in the sense that there are communities around the conversations. And and there are suggestions on what I should talk about. But what I'm thankful for is the number of people who reach out directly and say thank you. And I know that as a community and as a country and as a people, we are not always able to vocally say what we're thinking, what we are feeling openly, because we're afraid people will judge us and people will be critical of us. And it's understandable, because the gallery can be brutal. But it's so nice to see the number of people who are, for example, going into therapy because of Stir It Up. The number of people who say, can I have Carol's number? Can I have Seth's number? Can I have this person's number? And for me, I'm like, even if one person makes that difference, it means a lot. The number of people who say, you know what, thank you for having that conversation. It's giving me a different perspective. And that's all we need, for people to start thinking about things differently and not being fixed in their opinion and their mindset. And yes, I have the trolls, a couple of them.
They're always somewhere.
They're always somewhere. But they also make it whole in the sense that then I understand that, okay, this is touching a nerve. Because sometimes it's because it's touched a nerve. Yes. Right? But I love it. It's my safe space. It's my hobby. So if you ask me what are my hobbies, I like cooking, I like cleaning.
Entertaining your close friends.
I like entertaining my close friends.
With a good conversation.
With a good conversation.
So you're doing what you love, sharing it with people.
And I have a new one where my daughter had a puzzle and we did it. Well, she refused to let me do it with her. So she did the puzzle all by herself. It was like a 500-piece puzzle. But now I've discovered puzzles. So I've decided I'm going to do puzzles, like a 1,000-piece puzzle or like a 2,000-piece puzzle. But it's just the introvert in me that likes to sit down and do things by myself. But yeah.
So you've mentioned your dad a couple of times and his kind of approach to parenting having, an impact in your life, positive as well. Who else? Have there been other people along that for some reason or another have played a role in your life?
I always talk about my grandma. Okay. So here we go. So my mom's mom was the one person I always say loved me unconditionally. And I think we all need that one person. So she was that one person for me. A lot of my inspiration from her came from someone who's had it all, lost a lot, but still managed to live her life with a lot of contentment in her heart and a lot of joy and resilience and just the ability to be.
The words you used to describe yourself have come
full circle, isn't it? Absolutely. So maybe that's where it's from. Yeah. And it's interesting. It was very interesting with Mama because she introduced me to God. And I always say that one of the biggest things in my life is my relationship with God, because it keeps me grounded. Recently, I was thinking about something and I had a word in my heart where God was saying to me, is there anything you've asked me for that I haven't done for you? And I was like, yeah. I'm going to shut up now, right? But she introduced me to God. And maybe one day I'll tell you my salvation story, but I always say it's an incredible story where it's a true experience with God that no one can take away from me.
I'll definitely reserve that one for another.
I will tell you that. I will tell you that story one day.
Wonderful. So, knowing this, how would you want to be perceived by anyone, by those you love in particular, but also by anyone who meets you? If they're talking about you, what would you want people to say?
I want them to see me as someone who cares about them and someone who supports them in achieving both their personal and career goals. I want them to see me as a problem solver. I want them to see me as someone who they can come to. So that I'm very clear on. Okay. I am absolutely clear.
And then apart from that in life, who doesn't know you, who doesn't work with you, who warm, is not in
affectionate.
It was not in your circle.
In my circle.
It really doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, but I'm also the person who will give. I can give square auntie vibes, and then I can give. When I say square, and it's like someone who's square. Yeah. I do come across as square. I do come across as square. I have a resting bitch face, right? But at the same time, when you tap me, my smile comes up, and it's not an unnatural smile; it's a real smile, right? Because I am genuinely interested in people, and I care about people.
Nice. Well, it's a nice way to end. We've, you've said that you've cared. You've shown it in different ways in the things that you do. I look forward to continuing the conversation. Next time we'll probably start where we didn't delve, which was on your conversion story and why you're so close to God. And then maybe we'll talk about, how it fits in with the kind of conversations that you have today, which are so open. Because people often think you can't marry one thing with another. So thank you so much.